There is a book that was banned by the Catholic Church for 400 years, burned in public bonfires, condemned as the work of the devil, and even today, when you speak its name aloud, it generates instant discomfort. A book so dangerous that its own author never saw it published, dying in political exile while his manuscript circulated secretly among the power elites who immediately understood what they had in their hands. Not a manual of morality, but the deciphered source code of absolute power. The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli wasn't banned because it was false. It was banned because it was too true. Because it revealed, without filters, without apologies, without the hypocrisy that has always surrounded power, exactly how real rulers conquered, maintained, and expanded their dominion. And that naked truth was so dangerous, it had to be suppressed. But here's the secret nobody tells you. While the church burned copies publicly, princes, popes, emperors, future dictators, modern CEOs all read The Prince in private, memorizing every lesson, applying every strategy. Napoleon Bonaparte slept with a copy under his pillow. Mussolini wrote his doctoral thesis on Machiavelli. Stalin applied his principles with surgical precision. Henry Kissinger quoted passages from memory in diplomatic negotiations. And today, right now, in Silicon Valley boardrooms, in the offices of global political power, in secret meetings where decisions that shape the world are made, The Prince remains the unofficial manual, the book everyone reads but no one admits to following. Because Machiavelli committed the unforgivable sin, he said aloud what everyone practiced in silence. And for that, his name became an adjective, an insult, a symbol of everything dark in human nature. But what if Machiavelli wasn't the villain? What if he was simply the only one brave enough or desperate enough to write the truth? Florence, 1513. Niccolò Machiavelli is 44 years old and his life is destroyed. A year earlier, he held one of the most important political positions in the Republic of Florence, Secretary of the Second Chancery, responsible for foreign affairs and defense. For 14 years, he had been the man behind the most delicate diplomatic negotiations, had traveled as ambassador to the most powerful courts in Europe, had personally met kings, popes, emperors. He had stood beside Cesare Borgia, the son of Pope Alexander VI, observing up close how Italy's most ruthless man conquered territories using any means necessary. Betrayal, assassination, temporary alliances broken at the opportune moment. Machiavelli had seen power operating without masks, and now all of that had evaporated. In 1512, the Medici, Europe's most powerful banking family, retook control of Florence after 18 years of Republican rule. Machiavelli, loyal to the Republic, was immediately dismissed. But they didn't stop there. They accused him of conspiracy, arrested him, tortured him with the method called strappado, where you're suspended from the ceiling with your hands tied behind your back and dropped repeatedly, dislocating your shoulders, breaking joints. Machiavelli endured, confessed nothing because there was nothing to confess, and was eventually released under a general amnesty when Giovanni de' Medici became Pope Leo X. But his career was finished. His income disappeared. His reputation shattered. He was exiled to a small family property in San Casciano, in the hills outside Florence, where he lived in relative poverty with his wife and 6 children. And it was there, in that forced exile, feeling the bitterness of having been erased from the political stage he had dominated, where Machiavelli wrote The Prince. He wrote it in 6 months, feverishly, between 1513 and early 1514, as a desperate act of political survival. Because Machiavelli understood something fundamental. If he couldn't exercise power directly, he would write the definitive manual of power and dedicate it to Lorenzo de' Medici, the new Lord of Florence, hoping the book would be his ticket back to the political world. It was his cover letter, his resume, his demonstration that no one in Italy understood the real workings of power like him. Every page dripped with practical experience, direct observations of how the powerful really operated when no one was watching. But you need to understand the broader context to grasp why this book was so revolutionary and so dangerous. Italy in the 16th century wasn't a nation, it was a fragmented battlefield. The peninsula was divided into dozens of small states, republics like Florence and Venice, duchies like Milan and Ferrara, the Kingdom of Naples in the south, the Papal States in the center controlled by the Vatican, and all were constantly at war with each other, hiring mercenary armies called condottieri because none trusted arming their own citizens. Worse still, the great European powers, France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, constantly invaded Italy, using the Italian states as pawns in their geopolitical games. Machiavelli lived watching his beloved Italy be humiliated, plundered, violated by foreigners because the Italians couldn't unite, couldn't create a strong, centralized state that could defend itself. And here's where Machiavelli's personal desperation merges with his political vision. He saw in Lorenzo de' Medici the possibility of a new prince who could unify Italy by force, expel foreign invaders, create a modern nation. The final chapter of The Prince is literally an emotional, almost poetic call, exhorting the Medici to take back Italy and liberate it from the barbarians. But to achieve that, the new prince would need to do things that traditional Christian morality condemned: lie, betray, murder, break sacred oaths, all of it when necessary for the survival and expansion of the state. And Machiavelli wrote exactly that, without apologizing, without sugarcoating, without the hypocrisy that characterized all previous mirrors for princes. Those books that pretended to teach governance, but were really idealistic moral treatises with no connection to reality. So what does The Prince actually say? Because it's easy to talk about Machiavelli in the abstract, but you need to know the specific principles that made it the West's most dangerous book. The book has 26 short chapters, written in direct, almost clinical prose. The first 11 chapters classify types of principalities and how to conquer and maintain them. Here Machiavelli is ruthlessly practical. If you conquer new territory, you have two options. First, go live there personally to control directly and prevent your officers from plundering it. Second, if you can't live there, completely exterminate the previous prince's family, because as long as they exist, they'll be the rallying point for rebellions. It's not morality, it's the logistics of power. Machiavelli analyzes how Cesare Borgia conquered the Romagna using strategic cruelty. He placed a brutal governor named Ramiro de' Orco, who pacified the region with terror. And then, when the job was done, Borgia publicly executed Ramiro, blaming him for all excesses, appearing as a dispenser of justice before the people who moments before trembled with fear. Machiavelli sees this and writes, "A prince must know when to use well-applied cruelty. Well-used cruelty is that which is done at once, out of necessity for security, and then not persisted in." It's social engineering described with a surgeon's precision, but it's in the central chapters where Machiavelli really crosses lines no political writer had publicly crossed. Chapter 15. Machiavelli says explicitly that he's going to depart from the methods of other writers and speak of the effectual truth of things, not their imagination. because many have imagined republics and principalities that have never been seen or known to exist in reality. And here's the devastating blow. There is such a distance between how one lives and how one ought to live, that he who abandons what is done for what ought to be done learns his ruin rather than his preservation. He's saying, the ideal world doesn't exist, and if you govern according to how the world should be instead of how it really is, you'll be destroyed. Then he lists the qualities traditionally said that a prince should have: generous, compassionate, faithful to his word, upright, religious. And Machiavelli says, it would be wonderful to have all these qualities, but it's impossible to have them all and maintain them all the time and survive. So a prince must know how to do evil when necessary. He must appear to have all these virtues, but must be prepared to act contrary to them when circumstances demand it. It is necessary to be a great simulator and dissimulator. The prince must have the cunning of the fox to recognize traps and the strength of the lion to frighten wolves. He must know when to be loved and when to be feared, but if he must choose, it's better to be feared because men are ungrateful, fickle, pretenders, and dissemblers. They flee danger. They are eager for gain. And here's the phrase that turned Machiavelli's name into a synonym for evil: the end justifies the means. Though ironically, Machiavelli never wrote exactly those words. What he wrote was, in the actions of all men, and especially of princes, where there is no tribunal to which to appeal, one looks to the end. Let a prince do what is necessary to conquer and maintain the state. The means will always be judged honorable and praised by all, because the common people are taken in by appearances and by the outcome. It's more sophisticated, more cynical, more true than the cliché. Chapter 18, on how princes should keep their word, is where Machiavelli really shreds hypocrisy. He says that, ideally, a prince should always keep his word. But then he observes that princes who have done great things have had little regard for keeping their word, and have known how to confuse men's minds with cunning. And in the end, they have overcome those who founded themselves on loyalty. He's saying, look at real history, not propaganda. The winners were the intelligent manipulators, not the naive, honest ones. When The Prince was finally published in 1532, 5 years after Machiavelli's death, the reaction was explosive. Initially, it circulated in manuscript, eagerly read by the Italian political elite. But when it was published and spread across Europe, the Catholic Church panicked. Why? Because Machiavelli had done something unforgivable. He had completely separated politics from Christian morality. He had said that a ruler could, should, lie, betray, murder, break sacred oaths if it served the state. And he had said it without guilt, without asking forgiveness, treating it as neutral technique. In 1559, Pope Paul IV placed The Prince on the Index of Forbidden Books, where it remained for centuries. The Church called it satanic work, the devil's instructions. In England, the term Machiavellian became synonymous with diabolical deception. Shakespeare used variants of Machiavel as an insult in his works. But, and this is crucial, while the Church burned the book publicly, elites obsessively read it in private. Because everyone recognized that Machiavelli had described exactly how power really worked. Cardinals read it, kings studied it, generals applied it. The prohibition didn't destroy the book. It made it more valuable, more sought after, more influential precisely because it was forbidden. It became secret knowledge of the ruling class, truths that are practiced but never publicly admitted. And now let's fast forward to the 20th century, where The Prince emerges from the shadows and becomes the explicit manual of modern dictators. Benito Mussolini, Italy's fascist dictator, wrote his doctoral thesis on Machiavelli, arguing that the Florentine philosopher had been misunderstood, that he was really a patriot trying to save Italy. Mussolini saw himself as the embodiment of the new prince Machiavelli had called into existence 400 years earlier. He applied Machiavellian principles, calculated cruelty to establish order, manipulation of symbols and spectacles to control masses, temporary alliances broken when convenient. When Mussolini executed political opponents, when he orchestrated assassinations like that of socialist leader Giacomo Matteotti, it wasn't random sadism. It was deliberate application of Machiavellian principle, well-used cruelty, applied at once to establish dominion. Adolf Hitler, though he probably never read The Prince in full, instinctively applied many of its principles. The idea that it's better to be feared than loved. The importance of appearing virtuous while acting without scruples. The technique of making your actions seem inevitable, forced by circumstances. The use of the big lie, so audacious that people can't believe anyone would lie so brazenly, and therefore it must be true. That's Machiavelli distilled and amplified to genocidal extreme. Joseph Stalin was perhaps Machiavelli's most perfect student. Stalin understood the central lesson. Completely eliminate anyone who could challenge you. Leave no heirs. Leave no alternative centers of power. Stalin's purges in the 1930s, where he systematically eliminated the entire old Bolshevik guard, Red Army generals, anyone with an independent power base, was textbook application of Machiavelli's advice about exterminating previous princes' families. Stalin even applied Borgia's technique. He used brutal executors to do the dirty work, and then executed the executors, appearing as a dispenser of justice before the terrorized people. But it's not just dictators. Democratic leaders also study and apply Machiavelli, simply with more sophistication. Henry Kissinger, U.S. Secretary of State under Nixon and Ford, quoted Machiavelli openly. His book Diplomacy is saturated with Machiavellian realism. States have no permanent friends, only permanent interests. Morality in international relations is a luxury that strong nations can occasionally afford but should never interfere with vital interests. When Kissinger orchestrated the 1973 coup in Chile that overthrew democratically elected President Salvador Allende, when he supported brutal dictatorships in Argentina, Brazil, Indonesia, when he secretly bombed Cambodia and Laos, he was applying Machiavellian logic. The end, containing communism, protecting American interests, justifies means that include coups, support for dictators, bombing civilian populations. And now, right now in the 21st century, the prince is more alive than ever, but it has migrated from palaces to corporations. Modern CEOs study Machiavelli because they understand that corporations are principalities, that business wars follow the same logic as military wars. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, one of his first actions was to purge executives who might have challenged him, consolidating absolute power. It was pure Machiavelli. Eliminate alternative centers of power before they become threats. Jobs also applied the principle of calculated cruelty. He fired people publicly, humiliated subordinates, created a culture of fear. But he did it strategically, to establish extremely high standards and to demonstrate that no one was safe if they didn't deliver excellence. The result was loyalty based on fear and admiration, exactly as Machiavelli prescribed. Jeff Bezos at Amazon has built an empire applying Machiavellian principles. Systematically eliminate competition, use information from sellers on his platform to launch competing products that destroy them, enter markets not to compete, but to dominate completely until competitors surrender or sell. When Bezos talks publicly about customer obsession, he's applying the Machiavellian principle of appearing virtuous. But internally, Amazon operates with ruthless pragmatism, squeezes employees to collapse, optimizes every variable to maximize profit, uses any legal or borderline legal advantage to expand power. That's Machiavelli translated into 21st century capitalism. Mark Zuckerberg studied classics at Harvard, including Machiavelli. When Facebook faced competition from Snapchat, it first tried to buy it. When that failed, it brazenly copied its most successful features and used its massive user base to smother the competitor. When Instagram and WhatsApp threatened to create independent platforms that could challenge Facebook, Zuckerberg bought them for billions, not just for the platforms, but to eliminate potential competitors. That's pure Machiavellian strategy. Neutralize threats before they grow strong enough to destroy you. Elon Musk applies another Machiavellian dimension: control of public narrative. Machiavelli emphasized that a prince must appear virtuous, religious, trustworthy, even if acting contrarily in private. Musk has built a public image of visionary genius saving humanity with electric cars and rockets to Mars, while internally his companies operate with corporate brutality, lawsuits for racial discrimination, extreme working conditions, cryptocurrency market manipulation with tweets, mass layoffs without prior notice. But the public narrative of genius savior is so strong that most of the public forgives or ignores the methods. The question that must be burning you now is, was Machiavelli a monster teaching monstrosity? Or was he a realist describing reality? Because that question defines how we understand the prince and what we do with its knowledge. There's an interpretation that has gained strength in the last 50 years. Machiavelli was actually a convinced Republican who wrote The Prince as dark satire, as an act of sabotage, revealing the secret techniques of tyrants so the people could recognize and resist them. Philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau suggested this in the 18th century. While pretending to give lessons to kings, Machiavelli gave great ones to the people. The Prince of Machiavelli is the book of Republicans. The evidence for this interpretation: Machiavelli dedicated years to writing discourses on the first 10 books of Titus Livy, where he praised the Roman Republic and argued that republics are superior to monarchies. His other works show commitment to popular government. So why would he write a manual for tyrants? Perhaps to expose their methods, so that when tyrants use these techniques, the educated people recognize them and defend themselves. It's a beautiful, romantic interpretation that redeems Machiavelli as a secret hero of freedom. But there's a problem. That interpretation doesn't explain why dictators, ruthless CEOs, manipulators of all kinds find the book so useful. If it were satire, it wouldn't work as a practical manual. And it works brutally well. The most honest interpretation is probably that Machiavelli was both a disillusioned Republican who saw Italy being destroyed by political weakness, and a pragmatist who understood that in moments of existential crisis, only a strong and ruthless prince could save the nation. He was writing what he believed was necessary, even if what was necessary violated all the moral principles he personally valued. And that's the impossible tension at the heart of The Prince. Can you use evil methods for good ends? Can you lie, betray, murder to create a state that eventually brings peace and prosperity? Do the ends really justify the means? Machiavelli bet yes, that Italy needed a ruthless savior who would do the necessary dirty work. But history shows that new princes rarely use their power to create freedom. More frequently, they use power to accumulate more power perpetually. So what does all this mean for you? living in 2025. It means that The Prince remains the most relevant text on power because power hasn't changed. The scenarios change, technologies change, but human psychology, power dynamics, competition for scarce resources, all of that remains constant. And Machiavelli, sitting in his exile 500 years ago, writing desperately to recover political relevance, captured those dynamics with a precision that still chills the blood. The true legacy of The Prince isn't that it taught the powerful how to oppress. The powerful always knew that instinctively. The real legacy is that Machiavelli ripped off the mask, wrote explicitly what had always been secret, and in doing so, forced us all to look directly at the ugly face of power without the comfort of moralizing illusions. And that's why it was banned, burned, condemned. Not because it was a lie, but because it was truth that society wasn't ready to admit. The final question that The Prince leaves you with is terrible in its simplicity. Now that you know the real rules of the game, what will you do? Will you reject them and be a victim of those who apply them? Or will you study them, understand them, and consciously decide how you'll navigate a world where power operates according to these ancient laws with new faces? Because ignoring Machiavelli doesn't make you moral. It only makes you vulnerable.